So welcome back everyone. Week 2 of our Spring Buddhist Studies course, looking at the Buddhist teachings on Refuge, the 3 refuges, which we'll be chanting now slowly, more slowly than we traditionally do when we're doing the formal Refuge and Precept ceremony that we do usually 4 times a year around the equinox and solstices, but this year we're going to do it on April 16th in the morning, Sunday morning, if you want to join in for that. So let's get ready for that. I'll ring the bell 3 times, and then we'll chant this together and have a guided sitting time. Buddhang saranang gacchami, dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. We'll settle into our sitting time. Take your time, listen to the body, make the adjustments that are helpful. And taking the time, because we care, taking the time to allow this healing of the body and mind, how the mind is knowing the body. So the way we do that as we're breathing in, just this willingness to be inclusive of the whole body. And as we're breathing out, this willingness to include the whole body. Breathing in, willing to be sensitive, feeling what we feel. Breathing out, allowing the conditions of the body to be the way they are. So in this way, we're demonstrating to the body that we're not afraid to be intimate, not afraid to feel what we feel as we breathe in and breathe out, feeling the whole body, nothing left out. And in this way, you could consider this affectionate awareness. I'm here for you, honey. As we breathe in, simply receiving the experience of the body as it is right now. And the great gift that's being offered is this willingness to feel, this willingness to be close, to not have to turn away. And we begin to feel how this non-distraction, this intimacy is a real, actual healing gift for both the body and the mind. And that is felt directly, immediately, even viscerally, as a sense of inner calm, embodied well-being. There's nothing else we have to do. Breathing in, being intimate with the whole body as an act of love and compassion. Breathing out, being intimate with the whole body as a generous act of kindness. And noticing the positive, wholesome effect. And if it's helpful for you, and it won't be for everyone, but you can use a phrase from time to time. Something simple like, I'm here for you. As if we're talking directly to the body and we're healing the way the mind or the heart shows up for the body. I'm not afraid to be intimate. I'm not afraid to feel what's here to feel. And when you can notice it, notice that embodied sense of well-being as you're breathing in and breathing out. And notice how it naturally wants to spread and deepen and widen. And when we feel that there's enough of a sense of this embodied well-being, then notice the lightness of the heart, quality of joy. Keep it in mind as you breathe in and breathe out. That buoyant, joyful presence, joyful interest. And allow it to mature into a sense of ease, contentment. And we make peace with any mental activity, whatever it might be. It's just thoughts, just feelings, just perceptions, but whatever the mental activity is, just meet it from this place of joy and ease and well-being, a non-involvement with thinking. Doesn't mean there aren't thoughts, we're just not bothered by any mental activity. Just let it come and go in the periphery. And we're keeping in mind the joy, the ease, that sense of dispassion with mental activity. It's a happiness of not being bothered, not pushed around by thought. And to whatever degree that the mind feels less entangled with and less pushed around by thought, then that simply means there's more of that sense of space, space of the present moment, space of the knowing mind, and appreciating the space here in the present moment. Radiant and still and relatively peaceful, and to a large degree noticing that it's empty of so much normal neurotic activity, that the relative quietness and spaciousness is because it's empty of what might be normally clouding the mind, obscuring the mind, entangling the mind. And we want to learn how to notice this emptiness, this what's not here. So we notice the sense of open space at the present moment. We notice the relative silence and stillness. Even as the bodily activity and mental activity is happening there in the background, we're choosing to notice the open, silent, empty space of the knowing mind. And we just do the best we can, keeping it in mind the best we can. As we breathe in, as we breathe out, and if you need a little support, you could just repeat silently the word knowing, for example. Or the space of the knowing mind if you want something a little longer. Or whatever makes sense. Breathing in, knowing the space of the mind, sensing and even abiding in the space of the knowing mind, open and empty of so much, and really appreciating how much is not there, how open and empty, how still and silent the heart, the mind can be. And we're keeping that in mind as we breathe in and as we breathe out, appreciating it, abiding, relaxing with it. And allowing everything to fall away. everything that can fall away to fall away. And we're studying tonight the refuge of Buddha. This quality or capacity of the heart to be wide open, clearly aware, and not dependent, not fixated, not trying to get or get rid of. So for the last few minutes of our sitting time, just in a simple and honest way, interested in what is trustworthy here and now. This quality of wakefulness, a knowing that doesn't need an agenda, isn't trying to make something happen or get rid of something. So it's a very cool knowing, independent, released. And so we're learning to deeply trust and appreciate this capacity we all have to be beautifully intimate right now. Intimate with the way it is. Doesn't really matter the way it is. What's beautiful is that we can be intimate, wide open, present, awake. Empty of fear, And allowing this refuge of Buddha, wakefulness, to have its effect, its spiritually healing effect on the mind and heart. One of my teachers, Sayadaw U Tejaniya, a Burmese monk, he said, the awareness we are seeking is unprompted. We are not digging for it. We are simply residing in the ebb and flow of nature itself. We say the mind wanders, but in fact it doesn't go anywhere. Thoughts arise, that's all. The only problem is we think they shouldn't. That little teaching is a powerful pointing out about this possibility of non-dependence, a mind awareness that's independent, not dependent on anything. Not for or against, no agenda. So we're sensing this refuge of Buddha. What the Buddha means by the refuge of Buddha, wakefulness. And take some time. Stretch a little if you need to. Mary, would you turn the top two lights up about a third of the way?
On the right or the left?
The top two. So both of them. Yeah, that's good. And you can do the other one too. You can leave those, yeah. And then the one next to it. And then you have to do the slider too. No, above, just the top lights. And there's one next to that. Yeah, do that. You got to do the flap and then do the adjustment. The flap on top. There you go. Yeah, a little lower.
Very complicated.
I know. Good. So welcome again, everybody, and happy to be here talking about Buddha, not the person who lived 2,600 years ago. It'd be nice to meet him, but we lost our opportunity. It's interesting, in Buddhist culture, there's, we missed this Buddha, but we'll make the next one, right? So that's like setting that intention to be reborn at the time of the next Buddha. So there isn't just one Buddha, evidently there are many. And but in order to be a Buddha, you have to be born when there aren't these wise teachings around. Because that's sort of the technical definition, is you woke up you had deep insight without the help of the teachings of a Buddha. And so you not only have to wake up without the teachings, but you have to wake up without the teachings and be able to articulate the teachings in a way that other people can wake up. Then you get to be a Buddha. Otherwise, you're just an ordinary, fully awakened one. Which those folks, evidently, supposedly according to the tradition, have the same degree of awakening, right? The release, the unshakable release of the heart. But they had teachings that made it easier, and they may or may not be very good at talking about the process in a way that supports other people waking up. That's just a little Buddhist, I don't know, dogma maybe. But I hope that you just have a little bit of a sense of adventure in these next 3 weeks as we look at Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha in terms of something that's here and now. As it's said in one of the suttas, a very famous one, a lot of you know this one. So the Buddha's talking to a celestial being who came to ask some practice question in the middle of the night when the Buddha, I think, was doing his walking meditation. And the Buddha says, "Friend, that there is a world's end where one neither is born, ages, nor dies, nor passes away, nor reappears, which is to be known or seen or reached by traveling, that I do not say." So this place where the heart is released, now this is provocative, and it's okay if you don't get this or even understand intellectually, but this existence we have exists because of ignorance. We think, well, no, it's because it's all we got, so we think, well, don't take this away from me. But this existence, part of what we're waking up to is like what a setup it is. Having existence, having a mind and body. And so awakening is when the mind no longer clings to existence, no longer dependent on existence. Now, it's actually useful to realize, I don't know that mind. We know the mind that's dependent on existence, because it's like this mind. This is a mind that's dependent on, expressing my volition to do and to become and to get rid of. And when that doesn't work so well for me, I just try harder getting rid of and getting and becoming. And strangely, when we're not that reflective, we imagine this is all there is. That's all we know, right? Having an existence. We don't know what it's like when the mind releases its grasp, its dependence, its clinging to existence. We don't know that mind. I mean, some people might have glimpses of this in your life, moments of spiritual insight where the heart drops that kind of like an addiction to being. And that's why, in a provocative way, in the tradition it's called the deathless. Awakening, one of the synonyms for awakening is the deathless. And that's why the Buddha here is saying, he's talking about the unshakable release of the heart, but he's talking about it in terms of, friend, that there is a world's end, right? The end of this existence, where one is neither born, nor ages, nor dies, nor passes away, nor reappears. Now, when we hear that, we think about that from the point of view of a self. Like, here I am in a really dark place where nothing ever happens. Well, I don't want that. It's like, because we can only imagine non-existence in terms of a me who doesn't have an existence, right? Isn't that true? So it's really good to have humility, like we don't know what that is. And we don't realize what a heavy load, until we put it down, we don't realize what a heavy load it is to be what we call a self who has an existence. And that kind of ordinary identification that goes with that. We don't know what that is until there's a moment of realization of it, that non-dependence. And then even when we put that heavy backpack back on, there's a resonant memory of, now I realize this is a heavy backpack. That's, in Buddhist kind of psychology, that's a deepening insight into dukkha. When we have a better sense of what existence is. Because then it helps us understand what the refuge is. And one of the things, like last week I talked about faith, and like it's, appropriate question, well, what's the difference between faith and refuge? I don't know. But what I'll say, like I'm not sure in terms of the etymology of the words and stuff, but what I think makes sense to me is that refuge is a little bit more functional. It's like we go from faith, which as it exists, in our own experience, is this inspired energy, right? We feel inspired with faith energy. And then refuge is when we have some way of applying it. So it's still connected with the inspiration, but it includes. So it's an integration of both some intuitive sense of the end, the aspiration, like what we're practicing for, and how to practice the means. And that's especially important in the way that the Buddha's practices and teachings are set up, because there's a real integrity between the means and the ends, how we practice and what we're practicing for. So in this discourse, so the Buddha tells this celestial being, just to keep your mind open, people were interested in the Buddha's teachings regardless if there were, I think there was even a couple animals who were students of the Buddha, like an elephant that hung out with the Buddha for a while. But anyway, and so he's saying, because this Dewa, this angelic being, had said, I've been searching for the answer, basically, and I've gone everywhere looking for it, and I haven't found it, so what gives? And that's when the Buddha says this: you're not going to find it by going someplace, becoming someone, getting somewhere. And then he goes on, he says, but yet I do not say that there is an ending of suffering without reaching the world's end. Right? We have to understand something about existence and non-existence, but the way isn't to try to get to non-existence, right? So there is an end, but you won't get there by traveling there. That's what he says. Rather, so this is what the Buddha says next, rather it is in this fathom-long body with its perceptions, he's really talking about the body and mind here, with its perceptions, its mind, that I describe the world, the origin of the world. So right here, this is where existence is, where existence comes to be, and where existence ends. Right here, in this subjective experience of the body and mind. This is where we find the worlds of suffering, all the hell realms we've created for ourselves, and sometimes by extension for each other, all the glorious celestial realms that we sometimes inhabit when our favorite show is on, or we have our favorite friend with us, or favorite food or whatever, and things are dandy and we're so happy. And we, and something that's not that. Not the, as one of my teachers, I think it was Michelle McDonald, said, holidays in heaven and hell. Just kind of description of our normal existence. We're just regularly taking holidays in heaven and hell, and we tend to ignore all the kind of neutral times, and what gets our attention is the next time we enter a difficult period or a wonderful period. So again, just that last piece. Rather, it is in this fathom-long body with its perceptions and its mind that I describe the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the way leading to the cessation of the world. And then the Buddha puts it into verse. It is utterly impossible to reach by walking the world's end, but none escape from suffering unless the world's end has been reached. It is a sage, a knower of the world, who gets to the world's end. Now remember, the world is just this. So, because when we hear that word, we think we externalize it, right? But this is the world. This subjective experience that each of us are having. This is our world. This is our existence. And we know this, but we don't know, like this existence, in Buddhist psychology, this existence is like a house of cards. It seems really substantial, and especially when things are difficult for us, we feel really like, I don't have any moves, trapped, whether it's because of our financial situation or relational stuff or health stuff, or just feeling the suffering in the world and feeling weighed down by that. But as substantial as this is, as this appears to be, and I really get that it appears to be quite substantial, we want some humility that this substantial experience of existence, the world, is an appearance, and a relatively fragile appearance. And as soon as the supporting causes for existence aren't there, then this existence that we know and we presume is the only thing, it's just not there in the way that we now know existence. And the Buddha has an image of a room where the windows and doors have been closed and covered for centuries, let's say, completely dark forever, almost forever, until somebody opens the doors, opens the windows, and all of a sudden the light. And it doesn't matter how long it's been dark, as soon as the windows open, the doors open, the place is different, radically different. And it's just a simile about how quickly things can change. And the part of what gives this existence its solidity is we project the idea. We're convinced, arrogantly convinced, it is permanent. It's about me, It's going to give me satisfaction if I can just manipulate the conditions, the circumstances of my life in just the right way. I'm finally going to get satisfied. I think I can do it. Or I can't do it because society has screwed me over, But still, like if society didn't screw me over, then I would be satisfied. So there's this idea that there is this fixed existence, and it can provide satisfaction if I just had the right good fortune or whatever, tried harder, and somehow all of that is personal. And that's the glue that makes it appear substantial. So when we practice, when we take refuge in the Buddha, then we're not taking refuge in our conditioned perceptual habits of projecting permanence and things are personal. We're taking refuge, like I tried to guide us, to that quality of the mind that can be wide open, without an agenda, clear, silent, still, profoundly sensitive, not distant, not disconnected, right? Intimate. And with that mind, what we mean by the refuge of Buddha, wakefulness, awakenedness, then we can be intimate with Dhamma, the second refuge that we'll talk about next week, and learn something. Like learn how to relate to existence in a way that doesn't apply glue. Or as the Buddha said, instead of periodically throwing 40 cartloads of fuel into the fires that makes this world, existence, seem so substantial and personal, we just don't do that. And then over time and with the deepening of insight, whether the insights are powerful moments or just gradual moments of awakening, but life, existence, as we know it, it starts to become more porous and semi-transparent. It's like, still feel like I got a body here, feel like I have relationships. When you insult me, it still kind of hurts. I know the difference between pleasure and pain. It's like we don't lose functionality as a human being, but the relationship to this, what we call the world, existence, reality, you, me, this, that, it's just lighter. It's more, like I said, porous or semi-transparent or not so personal. It's still what it is, but the projection of permanence and it's personal, and there is some way to get satisfied, even if I don't have it now. They're basically ideas, very deeply pervasive, entrenched ideas, but they're just, we have more of a sense of serene amusement about them, like how pervasive those ideas are. Like, oh, that's kind of interesting and unfortunate that the mind keeps seeing, perceiving in those ways, because it doesn't facilitate well-being or kindness or a healthy way of participating in the world. Those habits of taking things personally and imagining things are more permanent. Because of that wrong idea of permanence, everything seems worthy of clinging to. I get upset when you scratch my car because I had this wrong idea that the newness of my car was permanent in a way that it never was permanent. So it's so much more upsetting. So we need to take that energy of faith, and the next step is to do a search, to use that inspired energy like, well, who knows something about what to do with this life? And so there's a lot of false promises, and it would be really fun, actually, and you could do this next week in your small group if it makes sense to you. But you could just, in your 2 or 3 minutes in your small group, you can just talk about all the false refuges you've been entranced with in your life. thinking that if I become this, if I do this, if I orient around this, then I'll be happy, I'll be peaceful, I'll be free, I'll be, whatever you thought you'd be. That's the nice thing about that movie that came out a long time ago now, Big. I don't know, Tom Hanks was in it. It's a little boy who somehow makes a wish to want to be big. And then he wakes up the next morning, he's big, he's grown up. And he finds out it's not necessarily so great to be big. But, we've wanted to be big, and we've wanted to have a partner, or we've wanted to have a job, or we wanted to have some financial security, or we wanted to, whatever. And then sometimes we get those things, and it doesn't really change anything. It changes some things. So the reason why it can be helpful is we have to keep bringing some intelligence to what we do with refuge. That's kind of like faith transitioning to refuge means that we're applying ourselves to something, but it's based on some learning, some knowledge. It has something to do with freedom, what we intuit that the heart really wants. What does the heart really want? It wants to be unburdened by whatever it is it's burdened by, right? And then what's really useful about that is actually not that thought that my heart is burdened and it wants to be unburdened, but to actually learn how to sense that this heart is entangled, it's burdened, it's tight, it's squeezed. And to the degree I know my heart is constricted, then even if I don't have a lot of deep spiritual experience, I can imagine not that, not this constricted heart, not this heavy heart, right? But I have to know the heaviness of my heart to be able to aspire to imagine not this. I don't even know what that is, but I know what this is, because this is here and now. This fear, this tightness, this heaviness, this loneliness, this whatever constriction, heaviness that we experience in life. Oh yeah, not that. This is how Nyanaponika Thera said it. He was a Westerner who went to Sri Lanka a long time ago. He's dead now. And he was a monk in Sri Lanka for many decades and a wonderful teacher and translator. And he wrote, I added one of his articles in the study articles that I sent out in the email this afternoon. And he wrote, refuge is a practice, or I wrote that, and he wrote, a conscious act of will directed toward liberation, right? So we're doing something, intentionally doing something, however loosely or wisely, it's connected to some sense of freedom. We're finding a way. We're following our own sense of freedom. For better or worse, we have to learn how to be self-reliant. Whatever good instructions we get from someone like the Buddha, we still have to apply them, right? Because whatever the Buddha says about nibbana, nirvana, or freedom, we have to kind of have a sense of what that word points to. Because the word itself doesn't help us. Even something more straightforward like calm, we have to have some sense of direct, immediate sense of that. So it's a conscious act of will directed toward liberation based on knowledge, right? Based on some reflection, like we've heard something and we've thought about it, and in thinking about it, we've applied it, we've sort of used it to sort of study our own immediate, direct experiencing. So we're grounding it in our own lived experience. And then he ends by saying, inspired by faith. So it's a conscious act of will directed towards liberation, or we could say freedom, based on this contemplation, this study, he writes, knowledge, and inspired by faith. That's the energy behind it, and faith basically is what we've learned from life. It's like, yeah, there is suffering, and I have this tendency to just want to complain or shut down or give up. But I'm realizing this is where the faith comes in. There's another option, which is to get interested. Like not to give up, not to close down because life is difficult, but to get interested. See, that's the birth of faith. Is there a way? Not that we're certain, but some people, if we're lucky, we bump into somebody's teachings that says, hey, there's a way. And then we hear it and we study it enough to go, well, I'm not so sure, but I'm willing to take a look. And that's the contemplation. So we study, we contemplate the teachings, we take whatever inspiration we have, but we've got to do something. Because it's that application that changes things. Nothing happens without that application. If we don't do something different, we keep getting what we've always gotten. Nothing changes. So we have to show up to our experiencing in a different way. And, the way I like to think about how the Buddha describes the ordinary way we show up with these 4 addictions. And I mentioned this earlier. We see permanence where there's not permanence. We see things as being satisfying in a way that they're not actually satisfying. We see things being personal in a way that they're not actually personal. And we see things dualistically as beautiful and ugly in a way that they're not ultimately beautiful nor ugly. They're just what they are, experiences. And so Buddha, this first refuge that we're talking about, is cultivating this capacity of awareness, of wakefulness, kind of whether you want to use the term bare attention or clear seeing. These are different ways it's talked about in the Buddhist tradition. Seeing things as they are, wise attention, clear comprehension. These are different phrases from the suttas, kind of bringing out different aspects, but it's really, the thing we have to understand is we can't will ourselves to that wakefulness, that awareness that can be intimate with things as they are. There's a healing process that has to happen that allows for that clarity. And that healing process is sort of what we went through tonight rather quickly, but it's spelled out in different places in the Buddhist teachings. One of those places in the Buddhist instructions in the Anapanasati Sutta, the discourse of mindfulness of breathing, where the first set of instructions is really about healing how the mind is aware of the body. And you're getting there when there's a sense of embodied well-being. Not because the body is all of a sudden different, but because the way the mind is relating to the body is different. It's relating to the body without fear and without greed. It's completely there, not afraid to feel, not afraid to be exposed to the 5 senses, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. And the result is the knowing mind, you could say, isn't afraid of being embodied. It's not easy being embodied. I'm sure you all realize that. But hating it or thinking that given that I am embodied, I can pretend I'm not embodied, that's just more suffering. And it's a tactic a lot of us use a lot of the time. It's like not being in our body. right? I mean, that's a common thing that people get in the habit of, being disconnected. So they get up into their thoughts about things. And then it's even scarier to come back to the body, because not being in the body is stressful for the body. So when we do go back, it's like, of course, I don't want to be here. It's like a dank space that no one's been taking care of. So we run away, we turn the TV back on, or we do something to get lost, to maintain that disconnection. So the first part, like if we're going to really value wakefulness, actually equally important right at the beginning is being awake to our relational world, like how we are with each other and how we are with this body. It's actually part of our relational world. It is, in a way, our most important relationship, how the mind relates to the body. And then by extension are the objects we use, the lectern, our cell phone, how we put our clothes on, how we handle the dish, and then, of course, how we relate to each other. And if we do that with a lot of intimacy and care and being all in, because not being all in is stressful. I mean, we learn this. It's like having a pet and not being all in is stressful. Having a partner and not being all in, having kids and not being all in. How many of us have had nightmares where we took on a responsibility and then we neglected it? It's like, oh my God, I forgot all about that. Whether it's, it used to be like, I signed up for a course and I forgot to show up to the classes, and I've got papers and, but it can exist on any level, and it is the basic existential fear of having an embodied life and not really showing up for it, and how that doesn't work. And on some intuitive level, we know that it doesn't work. It's totally understandable when things are really overwhelming to disconnect, because in the short term, we don't know what to do with the intensity, the overwhelm. But it just can't be a long-term strategy. I mean, it's unhealthy if it's a long-term strategy, of course. So if we're going to really take refuge in the Buddha, then the place to start being awake is in the nitty-gritty of our existence. Like when we go into our bedroom tonight or walk into your bathroom, it's like, really be there. Oh, this is how this bathroom is. The grime is like it is, The toothpaste, whatever your bathroom looks like, maybe it's really tight and perfect. And then wake up to that, where you've got everything has to be in just the right place. Or maybe it's totally a mess. And then wake up to that. Or whatever it is. Maybe it's perfectly balanced. And then you have shadows somewhere else. It's not your bathroom. But everywhere, right? We want, because then there's a direct result is that embodied well-being. Embodiment doesn't scare me. I've learned that the heart has learned not to be afraid of the exposure of embodiment, of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. That's our relational world. Oh yeah. And then we realized, like, I don't want to lose that intimacy, because then I can be shocked when I come back. So even if I watch a movie, it's like I want to remember that the movie isn't the whole truth. The drama of the movie isn't the whole truth. I want to remember that it's still like this. The bathroom is still there. The body's still here. You're still over there. We don't want to be forgetful. Once we understand the value of embodied well-being, because when we lose it, we can go into those holidays of heaven and hell that I mentioned earlier. And then we're always like thinking that I can think my way into heaven and think my way out of hell. But what's actually more trustworthy is being so connected, so present with our relational world that nothing is there to scare us. It's like all the doors and windows are open. We are constantly making peace with reality, so reality can't sneak up behind us and scare us. We're not disconnected from anything. Birth, death, highs and lows. And then the next step is to have that same kind of healing with mental activity. So we bring wakefulness to the more subtle internal world of mental activity. Emotions, perceptions, all those, usually unseen biases. I noticed something the other day where I was rooting for one team. I was watching one of the basketball games, college basketball games, and there was this player, and I had this perception of this player based on the color of their skin and the size of their body and, all this sort of ways that we've been programmed to, make up stories about each other. And he was with a highly rated, they were, number 1 or number 2 seed against a lower seed. And I was just, in an unconscious way, I was sort of making this sort of shorter, smaller players like better, nicer, and big, bad players, It's just unconscious to some degree. And then a few days after the game, I just so happened to see a local reporter. I forget where this person was from. Maybe it was Providence or maybe it was Arizona, I forget. But a local reporter was interviewing the person in the locker room afterward. And he just had such a sweet disposition that didn't fit my perception of him, because I thought, oh, he's going to be this way or that way. And but he was the way he is. And it just, it was so shocking because I really saw the difference and just, oh yeah, that's delusion. And so when we bring wakefulness to, we have enough stability, enough ease, enough of that embodied well-being and the joy and ease that can come from that we can observe the thinking mind, the perceiving mind, all these conditioned biases and ways of making up stuff, which we're doing all the time. Right now, we're making up. And we're mostly living in those made-up stories. But we can observe that now with dispassion. That's what this refuge of Buddha allows us to do. We see mental activity as just that. It's just mental activity. Making stuff up according to how the mind was conditioned through culture, the way that it's conditioned to think this way about that and that way about this, and all the time. Around gender, around race, around class, around body size, around, ethnicities, all that stuff. And we kind of live internally with it, but we also then act it out in our actions in the world. But now we see it because we're not intoxicated by it. Because of the embodied well-being and the joy. And joy is just like starting to sense how everything is just happening on its own. Just like the nature of the activity of the mind, the nature of the activity of the body. And it's okay that it's all this experience, this existence is just alive, it's moving, it's flowing. And the stability of awareness, Buddha, can just be there with it. And we start to cultivate a dispassionate relationship to mental activity. And it's such a powerful insight to realize we are not our thoughts. I mean, we can get that intellectually, but to really see that thoughts are just thoughts. And this is an insight that now I have many times every day. There will be some kind of current of thought in my mind, judgment, planning, whatever it is, and some identification. And then at some point, the grip of the identification to the thought is enough to trigger some curiosity, some wakefulness, some Buddha, the refuge of Buddha. And then it sees the thought, sees the identification. Being aware of thought doesn't coexist with identification with thought, right? They don't coexist in the mind in the same moment, right? It's like, can we be identified when there's that awareness? You can be aware of the after effect of being identified or attached. But Buddha isn't attached. That's the nature of that refuge. It's just like a mirror. It's just reflecting, hey, it's like this. So there's that flavor of freedom, that unmistakable taste, flavor of freedom in a moment of Buddha. And that space, that freedom from being pushed around, being oppressed by the meaning our thoughts construct, it's liberating. And I'm guessing most of you have seen the mind generating some content that would in the past be sort of oppressive in your heart, if you were to be identified with it. But it's like, oh, I see you. Some like some hatred, self-hatred story. You're no good, Mark. And you definitely shouldn't be a Buddhist meditation teacher. Something. But to see that arise, like that perfectly formed, convincing doubt arise in the mind, but to have that Buddha there that recognizes, well, that's just that. It's not nothing, it's just that thought being known. It's not more, it's not less, it's just that. And there's some freedom there. So that's the Buddha to be looking for this next week, in our practice. And how do we keep it in mind? So just you can go back to what Nyanaponika said, it's a conscious act. We're doing something. We're not passive. And that conscious act it has something to do with how, to whatever degree we understand the experience of stress or suffering, mental suffering, my heart being burdened, and then we can appreciate the possibility of not that, the release of that, and maybe even aspiring to the unshakable release of the heart. Like the heart can maybe possibly uproot even the possibility of becoming tight ever again, right? That, at least intellectually, that's what it means to be one of the fully awakened ones. The latent tendency to get tight has been uprooted. And for us, not guessing, presuming no one here is fully awakened, that means that we might have a moment where the heart is to some degree, or maybe even to a large degree, unburdened, not grasping. But then we take that personally. Like, oh, great. And now all of a sudden it's burden. Because I've got to be the one who's unburdened. And that's a burden, right? As an identity, it's a burden to have to be awakened. Being awakened isn't a burden. Being identified with that identity, because then all of a sudden we're afraid of being neurotic. because it messes with our identity of being an awakened one. There are lots of stories of, catching the teacher doing erotic stuff. Yeah, and in that work, that homework, where we're making an effort, having to do with liberation, working with some teaching, something, and the teaching we work with is something we're contemplating because we resonate with it. So, in terms of the Buddha's teachings on awareness, we're talking about Buddha this week, so the root of that word is to be awake, to be alert, open, clear. So we're really talking about that aspect of awareness. Next week we'll talk about Dhamma, right? We don't know Dhamma without awareness, but the thing about Dhamma as a refuge is realizing there's nothing that needs to be clung to in Dhamma the way it is. There's nothing here for me. There's nothing here, nothing worthy of grasping, and nothing to be afraid of. So the world neither needs to be grasped nor rejected. That's what we wake up with Dhamma, and we'll talk about that next week. But you can, in terms of like the knowledge part, like what are you going to hold on to? And I'll just share some before we end, and I'll open it up for some questions tonight. But I'll just read some different reflections about this part of the mind. This is from Ajahn Amaro, a British Buddhist monk. He's the abbot of Amaravati in England. He's been a monk for about 40 years now. And he's talking about his teacher Ajahn Chah and what he said. And he said that he taught that Buddha, which is a refuge, is the awakened nature of your own mind. That quality of knowing your own nature, which is unborn, undying, invulnerable, unaffected by any of the experiences that we discern. So I don't know if you sense that toward the end of this guided sit we did tonight. And for those who use the Anapanasati Sutta, the third tetrad, breathing in, breathing out, being aware of the space of the mind, gladdening the mind, concentrating, stilling the mind, liberating the mind. Those are the four instructions there in the third tetrad. Knowing the mind, appreciating it, gladdening it, concentrating it, liberating it. Right? So in that space, to whatever degree we had that sense, like any bodily activity and any mental activity were sort of in the periphery, far maybe in the periphery. And what was being noticed was awareness, the knowing, the space, present moment space, which is knowing. Do you see how even now in our more, we're not meditating, but even now, right? Can you sense that how part of what this is, it's a refined or a subtle part of what this moment of existence is for each of us, is the pervasiveness of knowing. Right? This everything that is here is in the space of knowing. There's nothing outside of the space of knowing. Can you sense that right now? And not intellectually, just in terms of this. It's completely suffused with knowing. This is. And we can learn to keep that in mind. as we, even in our busy days, that the moment is suffused with knowing. And it changes our relationship to everything when we're keeping the knowing in mind. And like Ajahn Amaro says here, I'll just repeat it. The Buddha, which is a refuge, is the awakened nature of your own mind. And you can just reflect directly as I say this now. That quality of knowing your own nature, which is unborn, undying, invulnerable, unaffected by any of the experiences that we discern. So taking refuge in Buddha means being that knowing, letting go of our identification with love and hate, praise and criticism, gain and loss, happiness and unhappiness, letting go of our identification with sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, thought, and feeling. And the neat thing you can play with as you practice taking refuge in Buddha this week is like, it doesn't require a thought. You don't need a thought, nor does a thought get rid of it. The only thing that gets rid of it is distraction. Being lost in thought. So maybe I'll leave it here. Gives us 5 or 6 minutes. If there's any questions, folks online, you can just raise your digital hand that's under reactions at the bottom there, and people in the room, you can raise your actual hand. Anybody have any comments or questions about what I said tonight, the refuge in Buddha, that you'd like to bring up? Yeah, Pietro, do you mind coming up here, Pietro?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I was wondering if you could clarify a little bit the concept of deathless that you brought at the beginning, maybe a little bit at the end too, but like, yeah, it's like a really difficult concept to grasp for the mind. Like, you're not dying, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, so it won't be good, but I'll do my best. And mostly what we want to be left with is curiosity. And so I tried earlier in the evening, just to notice, to be a little bit clearer about how we relate to existence. And because all we know is existence, the mind doesn't, or wisdom doesn't highlight our relationship to existence very often. But we're dependent on existence. And that means we're dependent on birth and death. Birth and death are relevant. Generally, we celebrate birth, and we do not like death. And but our relationship to birth and death, our emotional relationship to birth and death, it depends on a view or a relationship we have with existence, an idea that we have about existence, that it's substantial and personal. So the deathless is really the experience when the mind isn't grasping existence. What is existence when the mind isn't grasping it, isn't identified or dependent on it? And even in the Buddhist tradition, it's a little controversial about what that moment of cessation is. People talk about it in different ways because it's inevitable. It's not really built for words to express it. So sometimes, like that, even that word cessation, existence as we know it ceases. Because the existence that we know is the existence that includes grasping, identification, dependence on existence. That's the existence we know. What we don't know, what the mind doesn't know, is this existence without grasping. Is it even right to call it existence? Is it okay to call it the deathless? You know? Nibbana just is the word for a fire going out. But I totally get how, from the self point of view, why would anybody be interested in this? Right? But here we are. We're interested in this. Because on some intuitive level, we don't know the answer, but we know we're living with a bunch of lies, a bunch of made-up stuff. That we generally, most of us have some intuition. And it's okay, right? Because that's how it is. But there's also a sense that living with, ignorance or lies or whatever you want to refer to them as, it's stressful. And it has a lot to do with how we keep causing each other suffering. All the oppressiveness and injustice and evilness in the world is just an expression of the different lies that we're telling each other, or telling ourselves, basically. I'll just end with this one line that I've been using a lot lately from one of Ajahn Thanissaro's teachers, a famous Thai forest master who's dead now, but he told Ajahn Thanisaro, this American Buddhist monk who's the abbot of a monastery outside of San Diego, and a wonderful scholar, teacher. But anyway, he said to him, when you really experience release, it doesn't matter that it isn't personal, that it's ineffable or, out of the box or whatever we want to say. What matters is the heart's released. And that's the thing. We kind of follow this thread. That's why it's so important to have an honest relationship to dukkha, to suffering. Because it's sort of sobering, and it's our only trustworthy teacher. Like, its presence and its releasing. It's the only thing we can trust. Not what sounds juicy, but like, what does it have to say about suffering and release right here? Actual, heaviness, contractedness of my heart, and its release. Is it onward leading, or is it more of the same? Yeah, thank you, Pietro. And let's leave it here. A couple of announcements for the group. Some of you might remember last winter, Steve Hilson wrote a wonderful short couple paragraphs about Dana. Once each class, I invite someone from the Buddhist Studies class who's been around for a couple years, who feel like you personally have learned something about generosity, not just in terms of common ground, but just generally in your life, to share. It's such a central part of the practice, loosening. Like the basic expression of delusion is stinginess, right? So if you feel like sharing something orally or writing something that I can send out to the group, that's great. And it can be specific to how you relate to common ground, or more general about the practice of generosity in your life. So just send me an email if you're interested, or pull me aside afterward. And then lots coming up. This Saturday, Meski Babatsian and Shelley Graff and I will be leading a day-long Living the Practice workshop on emptiness and dukkha, suffering. So join in for that, 9:30 to 4. You can sign up online. The following Saturday, the 1st of April, Cecilia, Ramon, and I are doing a day-long retreat on resilience here at the City Center or online. The next Saturday, a bunch of wonderful leaders in the community who identify as male or masculine will be leading a community conversation for anybody who identifies as male or masculine. And we'll be looking at status and how we relate to status. Gabe's one of the leaders, and Louis Halameo, and Malik Watson, and Rob Reed, and Omkar. I always forget Omkar's last name. Yeah, just like Gabe said. Longtime community members and leaders here. So we'll be at the retreat center for that, so people can carpool out. We'll have a nice day out there together, so join in. And then we're doing our twice annual community practice intensive. I think it's April 10th through the 29th. Sarah Wilson and I usually do it every April, and often Gabe and Shelley do it in December for the other time. So join in for that if that makes sense for you. And there's all more information online. Good. Thanks so much for coming, everyone. Hope to see you next Monday night. Have a good week of practice.
Thank you, Mark.
Take care, everybody.